The rain came down in relentless sheets, a cascade so thick it blurred the edges of the world. Claire Thompson gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white as the wipers battled to clear the windshield. It was supposed to be a routine drizzle. She had said as much on live television just hours ago, standing in her crisp blazer and smart heels with her confident clinical delivery. Now the storm had erupted like an uninvited guest, chaotic and unyielding, throwing Portland into disarray. "Perfect," Claire muttered, her voice edged with bitterness as she navigated the slick tree-lined road outside the city. The forecast wasn't wrong, she assured herself. It had just been incomplete. This storm wasn't supposed to exist, a rogue system tearing through her carefully crafted understanding of weather patterns. Claire prided herself on knowing everything, on predicting everything. But now, soaked and shivering in her business attire, she was very much at the mercy of nature's cruelty. When her car sputtered and died in a flash flood pooling along the road, Claire felt her nerves snap. She cursed under her breath, staring out into the darkening evening. The rain was deafening, a wall of sound pressing against her. She needed to find shelter fast. Squinting through the downpour, Claire spotted a faint glow of light emanating from somewhere up the hill. There, at the end of a barely visible dirt path, stood a small house. Or was it a cabin? Its outline was faint, nearly swallowed by the storm, but it was her only option. "Here goes nothing," she muttered, grabbing her purse and throwing open the car door. The wind hit her with a vengeance, icy droplets soaking her instantly as her shoes squelched in the muddy ground. Claire half ran, half stumbled up the path, slipping and cursing with each step. Her dark hair clung to her face, her tailored blazer sagged like dead weight on her shoulders, and she was certain she looked nothing like the composed meteorologist the city of Portland watched every evening. Finally reaching the wooden porch, Claire knocked furiously, hoping, praying, someone would be home. After a painfully long moment, the door creaked open and there she stood, Isabella "Izzy" Ramirez. Izzy was a study in contradictions. Her wild, dark hair was cropped short and carelessly tousled, framing a face that was all sharp angles softened by warm, mischievous eyes. She wore a loose plaid flannel over a tank top and jeans ripped at the knees, looking completely at ease in the chaos outside. A camera strap hung lazily around her neck, as though she had been casually photographing the storm from the safety of the doorway. "Well, you look like a drowned kitten," Izzy said, her lips quirking into an infuriating smile as she leaned against the doorframe. Her tone was amused but not unkind, as though she were genuinely fascinated by the disheveled woman standing before her. Claire blinked, stunned and shivering, her words coming out in a huff of frustration. "Are you going to let me in, or are you just going to stand there making observations?" Izzy snorted softly. All right. Get in before you keel over." She stepped aside and motioned Claire inside, her hand sweeping theatrically. "Welcome to the humble abode." The interior was a stark contrast to the relentless storm outside. Warm and rustic, the small cabin seemed to wrap around Claire like an unexpected embrace. A stone fireplace crackled at the center of the open living space, its glow casting flickering shadows across wooden walls adorned with photos and travel mementos. The air was rich with the scent of burning wood and coffee brewing somewhere nearby. Cozy quilts were strewn across the worn leather couch, and a battered bookshelf leaned precariously in the corner, overflowing with books, cameras, and mismatched trinkets. Claire tried to gather herself, peeling off her dripping blazer and straightening her shoulders, as though reassembling the pieces of her dignity. She looked up just as Izzy reappeared, holding out a steaming mug. "Here, coffee. You look like you need it." Claire hesitated before accepting the cup. "Thank you," she muttered, her voice clipped, though her hands trembled slightly as they wrapped around the warm ceramic. Izzy tilted her head, studying Claire with those sharp, discerning eyes. "So, you're the meteorologist, huh? The one on Channel 5 with the cute weather graphics?" Claire narrowed her gaze. "I don't deal with graphics. I interpret data and model storm systems. There's a difference." "Oh, pardon me," Izzy teased, her grin widening. "You're the girl who didn't see this storm coming?" Claire bristled, glaring at her over the rim of her mug. "No one saw this storm coming. It's anomalous. That's one word for it," Izzy said with a chuckle. She moved to the fireplace, poking at the logs with a metal poker before looking back at Claire. "You're lucky I'm here. Most of the neighbors fled when the warnings started rolling in." Claire paused mid-sip. "Warnings? Yeah. Your storm came out of nowhere, but once it hit, it spread like wildfire on the emergency broadcasts. You must have been busy not seeing it to notice. Claire scowled. I was at work. I didn't know. Izzy laughed lightly, shaking her head as she sat cross-legged on the couch. Relax, Professor. I'm just messing with you. She gestured to the armchair across from her. You might as well sit. I'm afraid you're stuck here with me for the night. Power's out and there's no way out until the storm clears. Claire hesitated, torn between indignation and exhaustion, before reluctantly lowering herself into the chair. The heat from the fire finally began to chase away the chill, and for the first time since she'd stepped out of her car, Claire allowed herself to exhale. Izzy watched her quietly, her expression softer now, more contemplative. You know, you don't strike me as the kind of woman who likes surprises. Claire shot her a wary glance. I don't. Izzy smirked. Well, you're in for a long night then. For a brief moment they simply sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, the storm raging just beyond the windows, as though the world had stopped and all that remained was the flickering light and the sound of rain. Claire's eyes wandered around the cabin, taking in the photos that lined the walls. Mountains at sunrise, vast deserts, people laughing in faraway places she couldn't name. They were beautiful and alive, the kind of life Claire couldn't remember feeling. You're a photographer, Claire said finally, her voice soft. Guilty, Izzy replied, her gaze following Claire's. Nature mostly, but I capture people too. Their stories. She leaned back, her voice quieter now. Storms make great stories. Chaotic, destructive, but always beautiful. Claire frowned faintly. Storms aren't beautiful. They're dangerous. Izzy's eyes lingered on her, filled with a curiosity that made Claire uncomfortable. Maybe that's what makes them beautiful. Sometimes the most unpredictable things change us the most. Claire didn't respond, but something about those words lodged in her chest, stubborn and unshakable. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing, pressing against the small walls of the cabin. Inside, the firelight danced, casting warmth across two women whose lives had, for one strange and unplanned night, collided. And though neither of them realized it yet, the real storm had just begun. The storm outside had grown monstrous, a relentless fury that rattled the small cabin to its foundation. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets so heavy it sounded like gravel being hurled at the glass. The wind shrieked through the surrounding trees, branches groaning under the force until occasionally, a loud crack echoed through the night. Inside, the fireplace roared, its glow the only light now that the power had surrendered to the storm's wrath. Claire sat rigidly in the armchair, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hated the unpredictability of it all, the chaos, the uncertainty. Storms were supposed to be monitored, studied, controlled. Not this. She shot a glare toward the window, as though the weather might somehow be shamed into submission by her scorn. Great, she muttered, her voice dripping with frustration. Now we're officially living in the 19th century. Across the room, Izzy looked up from where she was crouched near the fire, adding another log. The flames crackled and spat embers as she stood, brushing her hands off on her jeans. Oh, come on. It's kind of romantic, isn't it? She teased, an amused smile tugging at her lips. No power, no distractions, just two strangers stuck in a cabin while nature tries to kill us. Sounds like the start of a great story. Claire arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. Sounds like the premise of a horror movie. Izzy laughed softly, the sound rich and easy, like she was completely at peace with the world outside. You're such a pessimist, you know that? Maybe it's the universe's way of telling you to loosen up a little. I don't need to loosen up, Claire snapped, then immediately sighed. Sorry. I just hate storms. Izzy tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her warm brown eyes. A meteorologist who hates storms. That's ironic. Claire huffed, sinking deeper into the chair. I don't hate storms. I hate surprises. There's a difference. The corner of Izzy's mouth twitched with barely contained laughter. You are impossible, Claire Thompson. But since we're stuck here, I suggest we find a way to kill time. Otherwise, you're going to pace a hole through the floor. I'm not pacing, Claire shot back even though she had considered it. Izzy grinned, grabbing an old plaid blanket off the back of the couch and tossing it toward Claire. Okay, fine. Let's play a game instead. A game? Claire asked incredulously, catching the blanket against her chest. What are we, 12? No, Izzy replied smugly, settling herself on the couch, legs tucked beneath her. But we are stuck here. And unless you'd prefer awkward silence and the sound of that storm driving you insane, you might as well humor me. It'll help you forget about everything for a while. Claire hesitated, watching Izzy's expectant expression. There was something about her, something disarming and magnetic that made it annoyingly difficult to say no. Finally, Claire exhaled in defeat. Fine. What's the game? Izzy's smile broadened like she'd already won. It's simple. We take turns telling the most embarrassing stories of our lives. Claire groaned audibly. Absolutely not. Come on. It's harmless. You tell me one, I tell you one. Besides, it'll be fun watching you squirm. Claire shot her a glare. You're enjoying this way too much. Because I can already tell your story's going to be good, Izzy teased, leaning forward with her chin resting on her hand. Don't disappoint me, Claire. Reluctantly, Claire settled into her seat, pulling the blanket more tightly around her shoulders. She took a long sip of the now lukewarm coffee Izzy had handed her earlier, searching her mind for something that wouldn't be too humiliating. Finally she spoke. Fine. There was this one time. Izzy leaned in eagerly. Claire sighed. It was my first month on air. I'd spent days preparing for a big segment on a snowstorm rolling in. I had maps, projections, everything lined up perfectly. I was determined to prove I was the best young meteorologist they'd hired in years. And? Izzy prompted. Claire looked away, heat rising in her cheeks. And? I accidentally said on live television that we should expect 12 feet of snow instead of 12 inches. Izzy snorted, trying unsuccessfully to stifle her laughter. 12 feet. Claire scowled, but the edges of her mouth betrayed a faint smile. It was a slip of the tongue. I corrected it immediately. But for the rest of the season, people kept coming up to me asking if they needed to buy snowshoes. Izzy's laughter filled the room, warm and infectious. That's gold. You are human after all. Yeah, Claire muttered, though she couldn't stop herself from smiling even as she added, Your turn, Ramirez. Izzy wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, still chuckling. Hey. Once when I was photographing a wedding in Bali, I tripped over a vine while backing up for the perfect shot, and fell straight into the wedding cake. Claire blinked. No. Oh yes, Izzy replied, biting back her grin. Head first. I came up covered in frosting and ruined an entire 3-tier masterpiece. I had to finish shooting the ceremony looking like a human cupcake. Claire burst out laughing, the sound surprising even herself. Izzy's grin widened in triumph. See? You can laugh, Izzy teased, her eyes twinkling. Claire shook her head, still chuckling. You're ridiculous. And you needed that. For a long moment, the only sounds were the fire crackling in the hearth and the storm raging beyond the walls. Claire met Izzy's gaze, something soft and unfamiliar passing between them. Izzy had a way of breaking through her defenses without even trying, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. You live without fear, don't you? Claire murmured, her voice quieter now. Like nothing ever holds you back. Izzy's smile faded slightly. Her gaze grew contemplative, shadowed. I wouldn't say that. Claire frowned. Why not? Izzy hesitated before replying, her voice low and steady. Because I learned too early that life doesn't wait for you. It doesn't give you second chances. You either take the risk, or you lose everything. The weight of her words lingered, heavy and raw. For a moment, Claire couldn't breathe, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Izzy stood and moved toward her, pulling the blanket up over Claire's shoulders. The gesture was small, but it sent a shiver through her, not from the cold but from the closeness. Izzy's face was so close now that Claire could see the faint freckles across her nose, the curve of her lips, the intensity in her gaze. You never let yourself relax, do you? Izzy murmured, her voice soft as silk. Maybe it's time you try. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Izzy leaned in, her lips brushing Claire's in a kiss so gentle it felt like the ghost of a touch, soft and lingering, full of quiet promise. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. She didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself leaning into the kiss, her hands gripping the blanket as though it were the only thing tethering her to the earth. It was unlike anything she'd felt before, something raw, unguarded, alive. Then, without warning, a thunderous crack echoed through the cabin, shaking the walls and breaking the moment like shattering glass. Claire jolted, her heart pounding as both women whipped their heads toward the ceiling. What was that? Claire whispered. Izzy was already moving, her face tense. Something hit the roof. A tree maybe. As Izzy grabbed a flashlight, Claire sat frozen, her lips still tingling from the kiss. The storm outside hadn't eased. If anything, it raged louder, as though the universe itself had sensed the shift between them. And Claire knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. The storm's rage had lessened only slightly by morning, but the winds still howled and the rain continued to hammer relentlessly against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth, the only sound breaking through the quiet tension that had settled between Claire and Izzy. Claire stood at the small kitchen counter, clutching a steaming mug of coffee like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, a little disheveled from the restless sleep she'd had on the worn couch. Every few seconds, her eyes flickered toward Izzy, who was lounging casually at the makeshift dining table, her bare feet propped up on a nearby chair. Izzy had an uncanny ability to look completely at ease no matter the circumstances. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and ripped jeans, her short, dark hair still tousled from sleep. Her fingers traced lazy patterns across the rim of her coffee cup, but her gaze was sharp, lingering on Claire like she was trying to read between the lines of her silence. About last night, Izzy finally broke the quiet, her voice calm but teasing. Claire froze mid-sip, the warmth of the coffee suddenly forgotten as heat crept up her neck. It was nothing, she muttered, her tone clipped as she focused intently on the coffee in her hands. A storm makes people act impulsively. That's all it was. Izzy's lips curved into a knowing smirk, and she arched an eyebrow in Claire's direction. If that was impulsive, Claire, then you might need a little more impulsiveness in your life. Claire's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of pink and she shifted her weight awkwardly, trying to shake the comment off. I mean that's ridiculous. Is it? Izzy challenged lightly, the humor in her voice only growing stronger. She tilted her head, watching Claire carefully, her dark eyes sparkling with amusement. You live like you're terrified to lose control of anything. I bet you even plan your Sunday mornings down to the minute. Claire opened her mouth to argue but snapped it shut again when she realized Izzy wasn't entirely wrong. Instead, she settled for a glare that held more embarrassment than malice. Some people like structure. There's nothing wrong with that. Izzy shrugged, grinning. Sure. Until you're too busy organizing your life to actually live it. Claire scoffed, turning her back to Izzy and gripping the edge of the counter for support. She hated how easily this woman managed to crawl under her skin and unravel the calm facade she worked so hard to maintain. It wasn't just the kiss from the night before, though that alone had been enough to keep her awake, replaying it over and over like a song stuck on repeat. It was everything about Izzy, the way she moved through life so effortlessly, unburdened by hesitation or doubt. It was infuriating and magnetic. Claire sighed. You wouldn't get it, she murmured. Then explain it to me, Izzy challenged gently. Claire stiffened. The vulnerability in those words felt like a chisel against a wall she'd spent years building. For a long moment she said nothing, staring at her reflection in the cabin window. The storm outside made the glass ripple and distort, like it was reflecting back the chaos inside her. Izzy didn't push. She just sat quietly waiting, her presence steady and patient. It was that patience, the kind of patience Claire wasn't used to, that made her cave. I grew up in a family where everything had to be perfect, Claire said finally, her voice low, almost hesitant. There was no room for mistakes. No room for failure. Izzy's expression softened, her teasing smile fading. That sounds exhausting. Claire let out a bitter laugh. It was. But it worked, you know? I got straight A's, went to a great college, landed a career I always wanted. Everyone thinks I have it all figured out. That I'm the picture of success. But... Izzy prompted gently. Claire swallowed, her shoulders sagging. But I don't feel like I've lived a single day of my life on my own terms. I've spent so long trying to meet everyone else's expectations that I don't even know what my expectations are anymore. Silence fell between them, broken only by the muted drumming of rain against the roof. Izzy studied Claire for a long moment before speaking, her voice soft. That's a lot to carry, Claire. No wonder you're so scared to let go. Claire's lips parted as though she wanted to respond, but Izzy cut her off, her tone light again, pulling the conversation back before it could get too heavy. And here I thought you were just cranky by nature. Claire shot her a look, but there was no real venom behind it. Izzy grinned, clearly pleased to see Claire relax even just a little. What about you? Claire found herself asking, her curiosity winning out. You act like you're immune to all of this. But no one's that fearless. Izzy hesitated, the playful glint in her eyes dimming just slightly. She leaned back in her chair, looking out the window as if gathering her thoughts. I wasn't always like this, she admitted quietly. I used to live a completely different life. One where I played it safe, checked all the right boxes. Stable job. Nice apartment. The works. What happened? Claire asked softly. Izzy looked back at her, her expression clouded. There was an accident. A car crash. I walked away with a few scars and a second chance, but someone else didn't. Claire's breath caught. I'm sorry, she whispered. Izzy shrugged, though her voice remained heavy with meaning. That's when I decided I wasn't going to waste the time I had left. I quit my job, sold everything I owned, and started traveling. I figured if life was going to be unpredictable, I might as well meet it on my own terms. For a moment, Claire didn't know what to say. There was so much weight behind Izzy's words, and yet she spoke them with a quiet strength that made Claire's chest tighten. Izzy wasn't fearless. She was just brave enough to face the things Claire couldn't. As the hours wore on, the conversation shifted. Slowly, cautiously, they chipped away at the walls between them. They shared more stories, some light-hearted, others heavy, but with every word they grew closer, the unspoken tension between them building with each passing glance. By late afternoon, the storm had dimmed to a dull roar, but Claire's mind was anything but calm. She stood by the window, watching the rain cascade down the glass in delicate rivulets, her thoughts tangled. She didn't hear Izzy approach until she felt her arms slide gently around her waist, her body warm against Claire's back. Claire froze, her breath catching as Izzy's voice broke the silence. I know you're scared, Claire, she murmured, her tone soft and steady. But you don't have to carry everything alone. Not with me. Claire turned slowly, her heart pounding. Izzy was close. So close that Claire could see the faint freckles across her nose, the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. This is dangerous, Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Izzy's lips curved into a gentle smile, her thumb brushing softly against Claire's cheek. Sometimes the best things are. Claire couldn't hold back any longer. She leaned in, closing the distance between them. The kiss that followed was nothing like the hesitant brush of lips from the night before. It was deeper now. Slower and filled with something raw and undeniable. Claire felt herself unraveling, every ounce of resistance melting away as Izzy held her closer, her touch gentle yet sure. Outside, the storm still raged, but it felt distant now, nothing more than a hum against the walls of the cabin. Inside, for the first time in years, Claire let herself feel something real, something unpredictable. And it terrified her, but she didn't want it to stop. By morning, the storm that had trapped Claire and Izzy together had finally begun to wane. The winds had calmed to a whisper, and the heavy rain had eased to a soft drizzle, pattering lightly against the roof. Through the foggy cabin window, the sky was painted with the first rays of dawn, pale gold and streaks of soft pink breaking through the heavy gray clouds. The scene outside was one of quiet devastation. Uprooted trees lay sprawled across the muddy ground, and fallen branches littered the narrow dirt road, still impassable. Inside the cabin, the fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of boiling water as Izzy stood in the small kitchen, preparing coffee. She moved with casual grace, her hair still a little disheveled from sleep, her lips humming a soft tune as she poured the dark liquid into two mismatched mugs. Claire watched her from across the room, perched on the edge of the worn couch, her expression distant and thoughtful. She wasn't used to this feeling, this strange mix of peace and restlessness. It unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite name. She pulled the thick sweater Izzy had lent her more tightly around her shoulders, her fingers absently brushing against the soft fabric. When Izzy turned around and caught Claire watching, she smiled, soft and warm as if they'd known each other for years. Coffee, she offered, holding up one of the mugs. Claire stood and crossed the small room, taking the mug carefully. Thanks, she murmured. She stared down into the swirling steam for a moment, the weight of unspoken words pressing heavily on her chest. Finally, she looked up at Izzy, her blue eyes softer than they had been in a long time. When the storm started, I didn't think I'd be here, standing in a cabin with a complete stranger who somehow knows how to turn my entire life upside down. Izzy tilted her head, studying Claire carefully. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? She asked gently, though the hint of a teasing smile played at her lips. Claire's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. I don't know yet, she admitted quietly, setting her coffee on the counter. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting against the edge of the mug before she looked at Izzy again, her voice softer now. But I do know that you make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. About life. Izzy stepped closer, her dark eyes searching Claire's face, looking for something unspoken. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Claire, she said softly. I'm just asking you to try. To trust me. She reached out and brushed her fingers against Claire's hand, the contact sending a quiet, steady warmth through her. Claire held her breath, her heart pounding as she let those words settle in. Try. It sounded so simple, yet it terrified her more than the fiercest storm she'd ever forecasted. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try. Izzy smiled. A smile so genuine, so radiant, that it seemed to light up the dim cabin. She squeezed Claire's hand once before letting go, turning back to the window. Looks like the cavalry's coming, she said, gesturing to the distant flash of headlights cutting through the fog. The spell between them broke as Claire moved to the window, watching the rescue teams carefully making their way through the muddy paths to clear the road. The inevitability of reality settling in was like a weight pressing against her chest. This little pocket of time, their stolen hours in the storm, was about to end. Claire gathered her things in silence, folding her borrowed sweater neatly before placing it on the couch. Izzy watched her with an unreadable expression, leaning casually against the doorframe. So this is it, huh? She asked lightly, though her voice betrayed something deeper, a twinge of sadness perhaps. Claire paused, her hand still on the handle of her bag. She looked at Izzy, her chest tight. I don't know what this is, she admitted, her voice soft. But I don't want to lose you. Izzy pushed away from the doorframe, stepping closer, her dark eyes fixed on Claire's face. Then don't, she said simply. You don't have to figure it all out right now, Claire. Just don't walk away. Claire nodded, her throat tight as she gave Izzy a small smile. It was far from a promise, but it was enough. Days later, back in the heart of Portland, Claire slipped effortlessly into her routine. The city buzzed with its usual noise, honking horns, the distant hum of traffic and the steady drizzle of rain against her office window. She sat at her desk in the newsroom reviewing scripts for the evening forecast, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Every time she closed her eyes she saw Izzy, her teasing smile, her dark, curious eyes, the way she had challenged Claire to live, to try. That evening, standing in front of the studio camera, Claire read the day's weather report as she always did. But as she reached the final segment she paused, something unplanned tugging at her. She looked directly into the camera and for the first time in her career she went off script. Sometimes, Claire said, her voice steady but thoughtful, a storm comes along that you never saw coming. It turns everything upside down and forces you to see the world a little differently. And maybe, just maybe, storms like that are the ones we need most. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. So if life throws you a little rain, maybe let it fall. You never know what might come after. The newsroom fell silent as Claire stepped away from the camera, her co-workers exchanging surprised glances. Claire, however, didn't wait around. She grabbed her coat and bag and headed for the door, her heart pounding in her chest. When she stepped outside, the drizzle had stopped and the air was cool and clear. Claire's breath caught when she saw a familiar figure leaning casually against her car. Izzy stood there, arms crossed, that same playful smile on her face. You're late, Izzy teased. Claire let out a soft laugh, her nerves dissolving. You're persistent, you know that? Izzy shrugged, pushing off the car and stepping closer. Well, I figured if the girl of the weather can stop predicting storms and take a risk, so can I. Claire stared at her for a moment before smiling, a genuine, radiant smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maybe it's time I stopped trying to control everything and just let life happen. Izzy's smile softened and she reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Claire's ear. I like the sound of that. Claire didn't hesitate this time. She leaned in and kissed Izzy, the city lights glowing softly around them as the world seemed to fade away. Months later, Claire and Izzy found themselves hiking a trail along the Oregon coast, hand in hand. The path stretched ahead of them, surrounded by towering pines and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Claire, her face flushed from exertion and laughter, looked over at Izzy as they reached a clearing. Izzy grinned, pulling Claire in for a kiss, their laughter mingling with the ocean breeze. But then the sky darkened unexpectedly, heavy clouds rolling in from the horizon. Claire paused, looking up with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I didn't predict this storm," she murmured. Izzy squeezed her hand, smiling confidently. "Relax. Maybe it's just the universe testing us again." A low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance, and a few raindrops splattered against their faces. Claire tilted her head, a wry smile on her lips. "Well, if this is a test, I think we're ready for it." Izzy laughed, tugging Claire forward as the rain began to fall harder. "Then let's prove it." This time, as the storm raged around them, Claire didn't feel afraid. She looked at Izzy, her hand held tightly in hers, and she smiled. For once she was exactly where she was meant to be, standing in the rain, living without fear.